Name of the document is called Contra County Purchase Agreement Addendum. So if you ever do any transactions in a city where that is located in the Contra County that is not incorporated, you have to remember to use this addendum. To give you an example of an unincorporated city in Contra Costa, you look at the name here on the second paragraph. Alamo, Bay Point, Black Hawk, Crockett, Clyde, El Sobrante, Kensington, Pacheco, Fort Costa, Rodeo, and portions of San Pablo and Richmond. If you have transactions within these cities, you need to be aware of this addendum, especially the seismic gas shut-off valve compliance. Say, for example, if you do transactions in Danville, if you ever get a listing agent that asks your client to sign a seismic gas shut-off valve compliance form, you can actually tell the listing agent not needed, because Danville is not an unincorporated city. Danville is an incorporated city. So sometimes they just kind of throw these forms at you. You know, sometimes the buyer, when they get this form, they get worried. They ask you to explain, what is this form? Why do I have to sign this? Now, if you are not familiar with this form, you wouldn't know what to say to this buyer. Okay, so the seismic gas shut-off valve compliance form is only needed in unincorporated cities in the Contra Costa County. If you get one of these forms, it has to be signed by the buyer in order to close escrow. This is a requirement within the unincorporated area of the Contra Costa County. If you don't have this form signed, they won't allow the escrow to close. So you have to advise your buyer why they have to sign this form. Now, just generally speaking, the seismic gas shut-off valve compliance form was actually implemented in 2006. So it's been around for a long time. But we're not familiar with it because we don't come across these forms very much unless you do transactions in unincorporated area. So if you get one of these forms, just explain to the buyer that the county of Contra Costa wants to ensure that every building will eventually have gas shut-off valve that will shut off during an earthquake, so that you don't have any gas leak that will cause a building to be on fire. Okay? So it's a safety device that is installed on the building, some parts of the building where they can install. Usually it's within the vicinity of the building. It applies to both single-family residents and condominium. If you ever sell condominium or single-family residence in the unincorporated areas of Contra Costa County, you need to know about this compliance. It's a mandatory compliance form that has to be signed by the buyer. Now, by signing the form, actually both the buyer and the seller have to sign. So for your seller, if they are not in compliance, they need to be in compliance in order to close escrow. So if you are the listing agent, before you get your property on the market, shouldn't you be asking your seller if they are aware of this compliance requirement and whether they have fulfilled this requirement? Now, usually, if it is a condominium, you can ask the HOA. The HOA should be able to provide this information. If it's in compliance, then the seller will just state that it is in compliance on the compliance form. If it is not in compliance, then the seller would have to state that it is not in compliance. Now, if the seller states that it's not in compliance, then the county will require the seller to bring the building in compliance before the seller can close escrow. So as you can see, as a listing agent in this unincorporated area, it could delay your escrow if your building is not in compliance with the seismic gas shut-off requirement. Okay? Now, sewer lateral. The sanitary sewer lateral compliance is intended for properties located only in portions of unincorporated. And again, if you have a building that is located in the city of Danville, for example, because city of Danville is an incorporated city, this requirement does not apply to city of Danville. But if you have a property that is located say, for example, in Richmond, because Richmond is close to the coast, you may have the sewer lateral compliance requirement that you have to fulfill before you can close the escrow. And then it says here, please also review the separate Contra Costa County or city-specific ordinances and regulations for property in the area you are either selling or buying. Disclosure documents and forms may contain references including website addresses and internet links, hyperlinks to additional important material that is not printed on the document itself. Buyers and sellers should investigate those links if they are not entirely satisfied with the document as it is presented to them. Again, there are some cities or counties, they also have other ordinances and regulations that pertain to that particular transaction. But the most important one is really the sewer lateral and the seismic gas shut-off valve compliances. So when you get a listing in this area, you might as well get this form filled out beforehand. So it will say this is an agreement for the purchase agreement. So I guess you can do it during the offer stage and fill out the detail, including the date of the purchase agreement, the seller's name, the buyer's name, and then put in the property address. And again, I want to emphasize that this form is only applicable for unincorporated cities, not for incorporated cities. Okay? And then here you're supposed to figure out which sanitary district the property is located. And you might be able to get that from Realist or from the local city. You can ask the city, what sanitary district is this property located in? So just put in the name of the sanitary district. Okay. Now, here, if you are in the city of Richmond, most likely you are in the city of Richmond sanitary district. And then, if you are in the city of Richmond sanitary district, you will have to say if an inspection has been provided to the buyer or not provided. That inspection has to do with the sewer lateral. And then you will have to say if a sewer lateral inspection has been performed, that you are in compliance or not in compliance. So there are two check boxes. One talk about whether inspection has been performed, and then one talk about whether if an inspection has been performed, did it comply with the sewer lateral inspection requirement. Now, sewer lateral repair work can be very expensive. Sometimes it could be as much as $6,000 or $7,000, just to give you an idea. Okay. Now here you have two boxes. To the seller, to be responsible for obtaining a certificate of lateral compliance from the city. Now, if you are not in compliance, let's say if you're a seller, you're not in compliance, this B box will be checked. And then the seller would have to be advised that they are supposed to get the certificate of letter of compliance from the city of Richmond no greater than 60 days after close of escrow. If you're not in compliance in the city of Richmond, they still allow you to close escrow, but you have to be in compliance within 60 days after close of escrow. Based upon the estimate provided by the plumbing contractor, the sum to cover repairs will be left in escrow until any necessary repairs or replacement of the private sewer lateral are completed to obtain the certificate. If no repairs or replacement actions are required, the property held in escrow returned to the seller. Now, if you did not do any of those compliances, a certain sum of money will be held in escrow to be spent within 60 days after you close escrow. If you don't need to make any repairs according to the inspection, then the money will be released from the escrow. The money that is withheld to make the sewer lateral repair or compliance, that money will be released to the seller. So the seller that is not in compliance have to be informed of that, so you have to check a box. And then the buyer, if buyer agrees to assume full responsibility for the city's requirement to obtain a certificate of letter of compliance no greater than 60 days after close of escrow. Buyer acknowledges receipt of written estimate and is aware of the estimated cost for replacement or repair. Now, if there is an estimate and you know how much it is for, you can have that amount withheld in escrow for the purpose of doing the work. If work is done by the seller, then money will be released from the escrow to the seller. If work is not done, then it is still the buyer's responsibility to do it, except that now the money that is withheld in the escrow will not be released to the seller, but will be released to the buyer. West County Wastewater District. Now, similarly, if your property is in the West County Wastewater District, you will have to comply with the sewer lateral inspection compliance requirement. Okay, except that you have different requirements. Earlier in the City of Richmond Sanitary District, we have this language in here in the form, but in the West County Wastewater District, you will either say compliance or no compliance. Now, if it's not in compliance, then it says cost of the compliance shall be paid by who? Now, let's say, for example, if you have a property that's in the West County Wastewater District that is not in compliance with the sewer lateral, then the buyer and the seller would have to negotiate with each other as to how to handle the cost of repair to bring the sewer lateral into compliance. You can negotiate to have the buyer pay for it, or you can negotiate to have the seller pay for it. That's totally up to you guys to negotiate. It's just an addendum form that the buyer and the seller have to sign. Rodeo Sanitary District. If you have never heard of Rodeo, Rodeo is a city close to El Sobrante. Okay, Rodeo is located in an unincorporated area, therefore subject to this form. In the case of Rodeo, same thing. It has the compliance checkbox and the non-compliance checkbox. It's very similar to the West County Wastewater District. And then you got the Crockett Community Services District. Same thing. This is talking about the sewer lateral again. You have the choice of stating it's compliance or not in compliance, and then decide who pays for the cost. Same idea. And then you also got East Bay Municipal Utility District. That one requires property owners to obtain a compliance certificate. that shows their private sewer laterals are without defects and have proper connections. The ordinance requires the property owner to test and, if it needed, repair or replace their private sewer laterals when selling their property. As one or both districts may apply, it is recommended to contact districts for more information. Now, here, if you are in the East Bay Municipal Utility District, you may have a property that is exempt. So property exempt, seller states the property is exempt because PSL on the affected property meets requirements set forth by EBMUD, and seller has provided evidence to buyer prior to final verification. So if you can prove to the buyer that your property, even though it's located in East Bay Municipal District, it is usually subject to the sewer lateral requirement, but you can find an exemption that applies. You can check this box. But if there's no exemption, then you have to state whether you are in compliance or not in compliance. If you are in compliance, you can state here in compliance, seller will provide buyer with a certificate of compliance prior to final verification of conditions. So basically, if you check this box, the seller can provide the certificate to the buyer during the final walkthrough. If you are complying prior to close of escrow, so you actually have a choice of complying before close of escrow or after close of escrow. If your property is located in unincorporated area in the East Bay Municipal Utility District, it's called East Bay MUD. Okay? Now, if you want to do it after close of escrow, before close of escrow, you just get the certificate before close of escrow. But if you want to do it after close of escrow, it will also have to state who is responsible for getting the certificate. You can make the seller responsible for it, or you can make the buyer responsible for it. And it says here, let's say if it's the buyer that's responsible for it, it will say buyer agrees to be responsible for obtaining the certificate of compliance within the time frame specifically set by the district prior to close of escrow, and agrees if needed to promptly, upon acceptance of the purchase agreement, to apply for a time extension certificate, which they shall deliver to escrow prior to final verification of condition. So in the case of East Bay MUD, it is not automatic that you get an extension. You have to pay a fee and get approval for an extension. And then it will say who's responsible for posting the deposit into the escrow as required by East Bay MUD for the time extension. So East Bay MUD is going to require a deposit to be made. So it can be negotiated for either the buyer or the seller to post the deposit into escrow to get the extension. And then it says here, buyer or seller to receive refund of the deposit once a certificate of compliance is obtained. So I guess the purpose of the time extension is to treat it like a deposit. If you fully perform, you can get the money back. If you don't fully perform, you don't get your money back. Okay, that money will go to the East Bay MUD. And then for East Bay MUD, it says property deferred. Condominiums are also required to comply with the private sewer lateral program. However, HOA for multi-unit structures served by a single lateral or shared laterals have until 2021 to comply. So if you have a condominium, you don't have to worry about private sewer lateral compliance until 2021. So far we've been talking about sewer lateral. Now we're going to talk about seismic gas shut-off valve compliance. Same thing, it will state whether it's compliance or not. If it's not compliance, then it will have to state who's going to pay for the compliance. It can be negotiated to have the seller pay or the buyer pay. But in some actually, it doesn't say, this one, it doesn't say you can do it after close of escrow. This one, you must do it before close of escrow. But you can actually decide, well, who's going to pay for it. Is the buyer going to pay for it? Or is the seller going to pay for it? You just check the box. I don't know how much. I don't know. I never had this experience, so I don't know. Water conserving plumbing fixtures. Now, this one says California law requires owners of single-family residential property built before 1994 to install water conserving plumbing fixtures by 2017. If any such property is altered or improved, then water conserving plumbing fixture must be installed as a condition of final permit approval. Although California law does not make compliance with the statute a point of sale requirement, this addendum shall establish which of the undersigned parties is responsible for compliance with this law. What this means is, you know, there's a law that says that you have to install water conserving plumbing fixtures, and the compliance must be by 2017. It is not a point of sale requirement. If you don't know what a point of sale requirement means that that requirement must be satisfied with before the escrow can close. If you work with a very knowledgeable escrow, they watch out for this type of requirement, so you don't have to worry about overlooking the requirement. I think First American is pretty good. Sometimes they will remind you. But you yourself would have to know about this requirement in case they forget, right? So you know that the water conserving plumbing fixture requirement is not a point of sale requirement, which means that you can even close escrow without satisfying this requirement. However, you can decide ahead of time who you want to be responsible for compliance. You can either decide to have the seller be responsible or have the buyer be responsible for all the retrofitting work. Now again, this is Contra Costa form. So if you don't have Contra Costa property, don't worry about this form. And just a regular car form will do it, okay? All right, so let's go further down. We're still on the seismic gas shut-off valve compliance. Oh no, we're off that one. So we're off water conserving plumbing fixtures, pool spa safety devices. To prevent drowning of children 4 years of age and under, California law requires owners of single-family residential property with a pool and or spa to install at least 2 of 7 safety devices. Home inspection reports used in the sale of single-family residence must disclose if the property has any pool and or spa safety devices. If the property is altered or improved, then at least 2 safety devices must be installed as a condition for final permit approval. Although California law does not make compliance with this statute a point of sale requirement, this addendum shall establish which one of the undersigned parties is responsible for compliance with this law. Again, the pool spa safety devices is not a point of sale requirement, which means that even if the property is not in compliance, you can still close escrow. However, the parties can decide between themselves who is required to comply with retrofitting the property to comply with the pool spa safety device requirement. You can decide whether seller or buyer. But in our standard car form, we don't seem to have this. Okay? This is only in Contra Costa. Permit work prior to close of escrow. Let's talk about that, because that may be important, right? The parties understand, acknowledge, and agree that in the event there is an agreement that the seller will perform any repairs prior to close of escrow that constitute alterations or improvements at the property will require the issuance and finalization of a permit. The governing agency will require the property be retrofitted with compliant water conserving plumbing fixtures as a condition of finalizing the permit, and or at least 2 drowning prevention devices. In the event The party designated above shall be responsible for the expense of such retrofitting, regardless of who is paying for the work necessitating the permit. So sometimes it could be the buyer who's agreeing to pay for it, but then they can make the seller be the party that is required to be in compliance. Or you can make the buyer be the party responsible for the compliance work. That's totally up to the party, which means that sometimes you need to do any work before close of escrow that requires permit. You need to be aware that if you're asking for a permit, the city may impose these new requirements for getting the permit, so that might delay close of escrow. No, actually, it wouldn't delay close of escrow. It will basically just let the escrow close, but then the city is going to decide, are they going to go after the seller or are they going to go after the buyer for the compliance work? So you can actually close escrow even if there's repair work that needs to be done, and even if the repair work actually requires a permit. You can close. But then the county wants to make sure these are all Contra Costa County requirements. So as you can see, they are very strict. The county is very strict, so it's not easy selling properties in unincorporated city. You have all of these compliance issues that you have to observe, okay, that you need to be aware of. Okay, have your buyer and the seller sign this and make this addendum part of your purchase agreement. Okay, thank you so much for joining me.